This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On Air.
Welcome to the OI podcast, Otago Institute podcast, in-depth conversations with experts from the worlds of arts, sciences and Mataranga Maori. Brought to you by the Otago Institute, the Otago branch of the Royal Society for Arts and Scientists.
Kia ora, I'm Dr. Barb.
And I'm Trudy.
And today's show is the Underworld of Fungi. And we're in conversation with Professor David Orlovich.
Today's guest, the expert is, as we
I've just said that, sorry, that's me.
So,
anyway, Professor David Orlovich.
we're just going to call you David for short.
Yeah, okay, cool. All right, David is from Sydney, Australia. He's been here in Ōtepoti, Dunedin since 1999. Oh, it's a long time.
Going back a bit now. Yep.
It is. And we'll digress into that. But we thought we'd just tell you the background of the salient points of David and how he got to be here. Completed a Bachelor of Science with honours, majoring in botany in 1987, which does date us a little, and a PhD in 1994, both at the University of New South Wales. Now,
however, like wine and cheese, all things get better with age.
Oh, that's true. And we are talking about the better things in life today. New South Wales, which one of those is which is the city that goes with New South Wales?
Sydney.
Right.
Yep.
Yes.
But there is a University of Sydney as well.
Yes, right. Okay,
it's
cool.
the other uni.
Right, okay.
The uglier one, as all of my enemies at the other universities said. Because Sydney's an old yellow sandstone building university, right?
Oh, right.
New South Wales largely was an old army barracks with demountables and things like that, and so it's a concrete.
Demountables?
Oh, you know, those portable buildings that
prefabs.
Right.
God. How many years has he been here? We just said that, didn't we?
25, yeah.
I bet you still call them doonas as well, don't you?
No, I have learned
duvet.
to say duvet. It's fine.
Okay,
and
sorry.
plant. Sometimes I say plant, but I'm troubled with that word.
Yeah. And the castles.
Castle.
Castle.
All right, moving
Anyway,
on.
go.
Yeah.
Moving along. Okay, David has worked on fungal cell biology, the evolution of plants, fungi and bacteria, and the ecology of fungi, which is quite a breadth of the fungal world, I think.
I wouldn't have thought there was that much to it myself, but...
Oh, really?
No. So
There's some educating going to happen in the next 50-odd minutes here, I can see. Currently, David is a professor and the head of the Department of Botany at the University of Otago. And you obviously teach botany, study of plants,
so, yep.
and mycology, the study of fungi, at all levels and supervise postgraduate students. And you're also, this is the exciting part, president of the Fungal Network of New Zealand. Now, that is not a network of fungi, because fungi are known for networks, right? It
Correct.
is a network
It's a very
of people.
fancy play on words there.
Very
That's
good.
it. Yep.
So we should be aware of that. That is a network of people who are keen on fungi.
Exactly.
And to get my weekly science fiction joke in, the spore drive is one of the latest technologies and the latest Star Trek,
yes.
whatever
What
episode you
what
think.
is the last one called? Discovery.
Discovery?
Discovery, yeah.
They use the spore drive to get
That's
around the
right.
universe.
That's how they get around the universe. And they've got mycelium and all sorts. You
Yes.
should watch it. It's on. I think
I
it's on
feel
Netflix.
left out because I kind of left the universe of Star Trek after The Next Generation.
Oh,
and so Spore Drive has totally gone by me. and I'm
No,
going
you
to
should
need to
definitely go back and
investigate.
it's worth it. It's worth it. Yeah,
Yep.
Definitely go back to that. And also, obviously, the Fungal Network of New Zealand. The big thing they're known for is organising and running the annual New Zealand Fungal Foray. And then we've just got a little thing here to say that his favourite activities, David's, that is, who's right here in the room with us, in no particular order, are discovering fungi, teaching students, still after all these years, cooking, including a lot of bread, if I'm a judge of any Instagram, and playing music.
Nice.
It's fantastic.
Yep. And I've got to say, I think the teaching of students is more fun than the fungi sometimes.
Oh, really?
They're the,
That's nice to hear. After all this time, you haven't,
Yeah, well, you said after all this time I might not be still liking that, but I think I like it more because they're the future, right? And, I can do so many things and discover so much stuff, but it's kind of better use of my expertise to just excite them to make their own discoveries because then 100 of them can go and do it rather than just me. So
And even if only half of them discover something amazing, that's like 50 times more than what you yourself can discover.
Yeah. And, you know,
assuming everyone's the same amount of brilliance as you.
Oh, yes, let's not go
So
there.
so you could say they're your spores.
Oh, yeah, I suppose you could. Yeah, we've got to cut out these puns.
This is going to be a very punific episode.
Okay,
Sorry.
but we'll calm down now.
We'll calm down. Okay,
So I want to talk about fungi.
we want to talk about fungi. So first off, what are fungi? Let's get back to basics, essentials.
Okay, the basics are that I think if you had to generalise, the common thing that all fungi do is that they are nature's recyclers. So they will, excuse me, they will take the nutrients tied up in, say, a tree and transfer that back to the soil and then help to then facilitate the new plants that are growing to take that up again. They'll recycle waste. They provide food for us. So they'll
Just when we eat the mushroom part.
Yep. Fungi live in our guts and help break
true.
down food as well as the bacteria. There's lots of
So it's
fungi
not
in
because
there.
people talk about bacteria gut a lot, but it's not just bacteria.
No, there are fungi in there.
So there's good fungi in your gut.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking of Canada, really, that causes thrush, and we don't
Right.
want to really go too much into that because it's not.
It's funny that you're just
everybody-
sitting here thinking about Canada, but carry on.
Yeah. But, it's naturally all over our skin and in our digestive tract, and it's only when we might have, say, antibiotics that might knock out some of the bacteria that
Right.
the
So it's
fungi
that lack of competition and then it just goes crazy.
Yep, that's right. And I've got to say, in teaching in the botany department, when I'm talking about fungi, the students are often assuming that this is all about fungi in the service of plants.
On the surface of plants?
In the service of plants.
Oh, in the service.
Right.
Sorry,
because
I
their
heard
focus, the students'
surface.
focus might be, well, I'm going to study botany or ecology, so
Right.
it's the plants come first, and the fungi are kind of helping them there. But I really try to say, no, all rules are off there because we can make fungi the most important thing, and it's just as legitimate for us to study the fungi that might be on the surface of our skin or something. There's no
Right.
plant involved.
There's no plant involved,
And I realise that might stretch people's idea of what botany is, but what the hell?
So what's the difference then, just for the listeners out there, between fungi and plants? Because when we're talking about the whole living world, we've got that basic kind of plants and animals. So you've got animals are kind of generally, plants, start with them because they're easy. Generally, living things that generally photosynthesize.
Right.
Or are very closely related to something that does photosynthesize.
Correct. That's
Because
it.
there's a few that have lost that ability.
And people thought fungi were plants
Yeah,
early on.
so for a long time they've been grouped together with
Totally.
plants, but that's actually not
No,
correct
not at all.
all.
And the closest relatives of the fungi are the animals.
Right.
But the fungi have cell walls, and so superficially that makes them look a bit like plants, but the cell walls are made out of
And of
something
course
different.
they don't move around.
No, they don't move around, and they grow in the soil under trees. So why wouldn't you think that they're kind of more planty than animal-y, But so really botany is kind of the study of anything that people used to think were plants, which is a terribly outdated idea.
Right.
But, so the cyanobacteria, they're easy game for botanists to study, even though they're bacteria, but they photosynthesize, right?
Right.
The fungi, the algae.
And there's viruses as well, right? In the botany department,
Plant
which are
viruses.
clearly not plants, right? But of course there are plant viruses.
Correct, yeah. So that does take a bit of convincing of people to get them to understand what botany is, because it really does cover a wide range of organisms. But they do all, at some point in those groups, they all interact with each other really significantly, right? So the bacteria, they have, like plants have an endomicrobiome, like of bacteria that live in there.
Endomicrobiome.
Living inside the plant, the microorganisms that are sort of
So
obligately
anything that's
associated.
got myco in it is a fungi of some sort.
Yep.
And mycorrhizae,
Yep.
endomyco.
Well, I said microbiome there, so I was really thinking of bacteria.
Sorry.
But again, it gets lots of overlaps, aren't there? Because the microbiology is typically the study of kind of microorganisms, and one could consider fungi were part of that, even though there might be some hardcore microbiologists that think, oh no, it's only the bacteria that are the important things, and the fungi are the kind of just happen to be there as well,
Really?
But
That's
I don't know. I think that's wrong. But see, fungi are beautiful because they live in the microbial world, interacting with bacteria in the soil where you find bacteria. But they also have a macro world presence in that when mushrooms or toadstools come up in the forest and you can pick it and you can literally eat it, that's kind of in the plant world, isn't it?
Because they're big enough, and that's their fruiting bodies, right?
Yeah, that's it.
In a way, the mushrooms that we think of, so everything we think of as a mushroom is basically the fruiting body because it's got all those spores in under the gills and everything. And obviously there's that classic line, all mushrooms are edible. Just some of them you can only eat once.
That's right.
But we don't generally advise people to just eat any mushroom that they come across.
No. It can be risky. It's quite difficult because out there in the community there is expertise, right?
Right.
You're from a farm, aren't you, Barbara? So
I am from a farm,
I bet you've got relatives that know a field mushroom when they see it.
Yes.
And they might pick it and eat
Yes.
it. And one wouldn't think there's a big worry about that because they know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
But, sometimes we get people bringing something in that looks quite a bit like a field mushroom, and I'm looking at it thinking, I'm not 100% sure what that is, but hang on, let me think. And then I'm stalling them for a few minutes while my brain ticks over. Then I realise it's something that may not be deadly, but it's not really something that's considered edible. And I was like, oh, no, I don't think I would eat that one. And they're like, oh, no, I had it for dinner last night. And as well as that, you get calls, on the phone, I've got a mushroom or a fungi. This is what it looks like.
Isn't it? Yeah.
And so you can talk through them. What does it look like? But if it ever happens that you see that specimen they're talking about, no matter how hard you can question them about what it looks like, what they say doesn't always end up being what you actually got, right? Yeah. And so I've become really cautious about that sort of thing too.
I must admit, I'd be very cautious about giving identification. I mean, even with a photo, it can sometimes be really hard because unless you really know what you're taking a picture of, what bits of the mushroom you really need to pay attention to, then you might not have taken the picture in the right angle or got the right, and there's colours that are important sometimes.
Totally, and those colours can change depending on if they've been rained on or how old the specimen is.
And I guess sort of even geography, like where you found that mushroom.
If it was under a particular type of tree, that
can actually really give you a lot of clues as to exactly what it is.
And then even if you know in that photo, yes, that's that mushroom and that's edible, good on you, do you trust that person will then go and find those other 5 mushrooms that were growing around it? Are they all the same?
Yeah.
So,
because if it actually has something that's really poisonous that looks kind of similar, if you're not an expert,
you might
actually be a little bit more hesitant to say, yes, go eat that, that's fine, that's a good mushroom. I know I would. I hate, just as full disclosure here, I hate mushrooms.
Oh, no.
I really, I think they're pretty. Like, there's quite a lot of pretty, and I love the mushrooms for, all the things that mushrooms do.
But you're not a mushroom eater.
But as an eating thing, I don't like mushrooms at all. And it does go back to that early childhood memories of farm mushrowns. Because
and my experience of farm mushrooms is that they're cooked up by farmers to resemble those tinned mushrooms with a slimy, dark, browny, blacky sauce. Is that how, or are you having them nicely pan-fried?
Nicely pan-fried and buttered.
My experience of mushrooms is that they come about the same time as scratching comes. So when
it's not an official program, but we get it.
We'll just leave it there.
Right.
Anyway, so actually, no, not me at all. But I'm very happy that other people like mushrooms, and I like to see other people enjoying mushrooms. And I know we did ages and ages ago when we were in the UK, we did a bit of a tour going over the Apennine Mountains from France into Spain.
Right.
And it was right on autumn there, and there was a little market there, and it was obviously people who knew, and it was local people buying the because
and they've been doing that for
it was the end of the
decades.
tourist season. There weren't any tourists around, so it was a local market, and someone had been out foraging, and they'd got lots and lots of mushrooms, all different types. And I was just so excited that there were so many different types, but I knew that I was going to hate eating them. But I was totally happy to cook them for everybody else, my husband included. But they were really distrustful because they thought I was going to poison them. It was like, these are some of my best friends, but they were just like, no. But they were really cool mushrooms, and I was just like, they were like ones that you know the names of because they're high cuisine in France. And I was very disappointed but eventually I managed to convince them that it was just because I don't like mushrooms.
Yep.
And I didn't want to waste them.
That makes me think of that case recently in Australia where
Yes.
someone tried.
I know. I was actually just talking about that with some students in a class just before I came here. Yeah, I think the lady is still on trial, awaiting trial.
Awaiting
I
trial,
believe.
maybe. Yeah.
So what is it in mushrooms or fungi that is the poisonous bit?
Well, it does vary. There's, but Amanita phalloides, which is the death cap, has...
That's the red one, right?
No, that's the greeny coloured one. The red one is Amanita muscaria. So they're
right,
related.
Of course, yeah. Muscaria is for the fly.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and there are a whole range of toxins in those, and some of them cause gastrointestinal upset, and Amanita muscaria's got that. And but Amanita phalloides has got toxins that will damage the liver, and because the liver is kind of the first organ that really gets to sort of deal with all the stuff that you eat, after your stomach. And,
I was just thinking liver failure seems to be a really common way that people, at least in medical TV shows, die from eating the wrong fungi.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And so when doctors get cases that, someone's eaten a mushroom and they come into the emergency department because they're not feeling well, then some of a lot of the tests they'll do will be for things like liver function, to make sure. And they try to keep them very well hydrated so that they can flush things out.
And I guess that's confusing as well because people aren't dying straight away.
No.
Like anything that someone dies straight away from, it's quite easy to tell what it is that caused them to be ill. And then other people are... I mean, that's how, as a species, we learn to not eat things.
Yep.
Someone eats it, someone dies. And I guess there's also a tolerance threshold. Like if you just have a little bit, or if you're a big person, and that's why things are more deadly for little children or frail older people because they've just got less body mass to absorb all the toxins in.
So what does the toxin give to the fungi then? What does it do?
Why do they have them?
Yeah.
Oh, no, that's a question. I get questions like that a lot. Why do fungi do this? And I haven't asked them lately, and it's hard to know. I just feel like the answers are sometimes a bit speculative, right? I mean, totally, it makes sense that may be deterring herbivores from eating, or fungivores, I guess. But then it's not always the case, right? Because some fungi that are poisonous to humans are eaten by animals, and there are old, don't want to be using a gender-based phrase, but old wives' tale, old husband's tale, that if you can see that a fungus has been eaten by an animal, then it's okay for you to eat. But that is wrong, so that's wrong.
So
don't we do not
say
do
that. Okay.
That's it.
So just because something else has nibble out of it does not mean that it's safe for a human to eat.
There's a ton of things like that. If you boil it up and put a silver spoon in and the spoon tarnishes, then it's no good.
I think I've read that.
I mean, it's possible that works for some particular mushroom somewhere in history, and it started and it's sort of been generalised around. But I guess just going back to why are they poisonous? Why are some mushrooms poisonous? It may be that they totally weren't intending to be poisonous at all. They've just got this compound for a totally different reason. Like
we don't know what that reason is.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just riffing here, but it might be like that the compound that they've got that's poisonous to humans just because we can't digest, what's the word?
Metabolize.
Thank you, David. Metabolize that particular thing. We don't have the right enzymes for it. It might be that particular molecule is needed for producing the colour of the cap or the aroma of it or something along those lines, or just it's just part of the casing of the spore or something. Like it's those sort of evolutionary ideas where we as humans like to believe that the entire world is set up around us, with us as the focus. And if a mushroom is poisonous, it's poisonous because it wants to get at us or stop it.
Oh no, I thought it must be there.
Sorry, I'm not meaning to tell you
some reason for the mushroom or the fungi to have it
I
there.
mean, there's another. I did mention herbivory there, but one of the things that even I just tend to naturally think of is if you think of an animal as going to eat a mushroom, you might think of a deer eating a mushroom or a possum or a kakapo or whatever. But one of the things that there's almost no such thing as a mushroom in the field that's been there for a while that isn't absolutely packed full of maggots of some type.
Yeah,
right?
that's true.
So insects.
Hence the crutching reference.
Yeah. So. I think insects and fungi have, and I don't profess to be an expert on this at all, but the fruit bodies of fungi have a really close relationship with a lot of insects that are associated with them. And I understand that there are some insects that are only found in the fruit bodies of some particular species of mushrooms. Right?
So that's quite a close mutualistic. And it might have just evolved to get stronger and stronger so that the insects that eat them then become poisonous, so it's stopping them from getting predated by birds or something. I mean, there's all sorts of those weird instances.
And that could be what drives the diversification of fungi. It's not something big like, does a bird like to see it or whatever. But there's all these insects and like tiny organisms that we really haven't got as much of a handle on.
It is quite an underworld then, fungi and little insects. So how does it?
So no, go first.
So they're on a tree. How do they break the tree down, or what's the relationship between the tree and the soil?
Yeah, so again, we're really generalising about all fungi here, right? Some groups, so if we talk about wood rotting fungi, there will be some fungi that are parasitising the tree. So they have the ability, like malaria, to infect the tree. They'll grow in there. They'll literally, in a way, they do something similar, that they'll secrete digestive enzymes that can break down either lignin, which is really hard to break down, and some fungi are great at doing that, or once the lignin's out of the way, they can break down the celluloses and the hemicelluloses that make up the cell wall, right? So, And in a way, like you think of fungi as they don't have stomachs like we do, so they have to like vomit up they produce their digestive enzymes out into the environment. Their stomach is outside, and then they just absorb those more simple, breakdown products of that. So that's how they do it. They'll secrete enzymes that will break down a lot of those constituents of wood. And like people have tried to harness that for making things like biofuels, and you might want to use get a carbon source that you can use to convert into fuel.
Also in recycling, right? Breaking down plastics. It's things that people just forever have thought, we can't really, that's going to take, hundreds of thousands of years. And then they find a fungi that's capable of attacking that particular molecule. And that's one of the ways. The other option for this episode, rather than the underworld of fungi, was fungi saving the world.
Sure. That's it.
Yeah, and of course, there's all these things come up every now and again. It's like, this amazing fungi that can digest this particular thing, and it's that kind of. Carry on.
Yeah. Well, there's and that's a really cool and active area of research for recycling and for fuel production. And that one of the things I tend to get the feeling about when I read a lot of those papers is that there's still a lot of these things, especially for fuels, they're very experimental stages, and the amount of fuel you might get from a particular fungus in a test tube is not really going to save the planet in any time real soon, right? And
but by the same token, because the part of the mushroom, the part of the fungi that you see is that mushroom fruiting body. The actual structure of the mushroom,
the
that
whole
mycelium
body of it
under, could be absolutely immense. And I think that's why I was thinking the underworld of fungi, because actually there's this huge underworld that we just really don't notice is there. And it takes up a huge amount of space, and it's really dense. And I'm always talking about this when I'm talking to people about carbon and how much carbon is in a forest. And it's really mostly, almost everywhere, most of the time, most of the carbon is in the soil, regardless of what's on top. Because even if it's a big forest, that forest is mostly full of air.
Space.
It's mostly space, right? It's the bits between the leaves. Whereas the soil itself, especially if it's that really, like the composty, loamy type bit of an old forest that's been there for ages and it's built up layers and layers of soil, that's, the stuff that gardeners love. That's full of all of the, I guess, bacteria and stuff, plant roots and things as well. But a lot of that must be these decaying fungi, mycelia, right?
That's right. And because fungal cell walls are made out of a substance called chitin, which is much less resistant to being broken down itself than, say, cellulose is, right? So the fungi are breaking down the walls of the plants and turning it into a carbon form that is actually going to have more longevity in the soil and increase the carbon content of the soil, because it just won't get re-released again as easily because it can't get broken down. So forests that have a particular type that are ectomycorrhizal, so they have these really big networks of fungi under the soil that are connecting the roots, nourishing the trees.
I'm just going to interrupt you there. The ecto means that they're outside as opposed to the endo that we were talking about before, right?
So the ectomycorrhizas form by making a sheath of fungal hyphae, fungal cells around every little root tip.
Right.
And then the fungus grows out into the soil and breaks down nutrients, etc., and then passes them back to the tree. But those forests have the status of those forests is a higher carbon status because they've got these ectomycorrhizal fungi there that have got such a big biomass in the soil.
And of course the forest and the type of forest is really important because the trees are there stabilising the soil so it doesn't get all washed away next time there's a big storm, and they're supplying the photosynthesis that's supplying those quick, easy glucose bits to keep that they're swapping basically with the fungi in that symbiosis that's going on there.
So it's good that you put a role for the trees in there because I forget about the trees sometimes.
Sometimes you do forget about the trees there, but the trees are really important, and also what type of tree, right? Because the more diversity of tree you've got, the more kind of resilience you've got to buffering those extreme weather conditions, but also to stabilising the system and to keeping that layer of soil really thick and deep.
Yeah,
because the more you can build that up, you've got layers and layers and layers and layers of the fungi. So it's really...
Yeah, that's good because sometimes I fall into this wonderful trap of thinking that really the fungi are farming those trees, right?
Right.
And the trees are really there as kind of antennas to catch the sunlight.
Oh, right. Yeah, you could think of it like that,
the trees, I mean, think of a Nothofagus forest of Fiordland. It's mostly
New Zealand beech for those out there.
New Zealand beech, silver beech, for example, or red beech or whatever. They're reasonably low diversity trees in terms of the big organisms that are growing there. But under the ground, you've got hundreds, if not thousands, of different species of fungi all surrounding the roots of every one of those trees. The fungi are taking up phosphate out of the soil, and so they're fertilising the trees, right? And the fungi, in return, are getting the sugar that's photosynthesized in the roots. So, the fungi are like the farmers, and the tree is the crop.
Well, that's quite a good way of looking at it.
So it brings me back to my other question because the question was from a farmer, from my father. So I told him that I was talking to David about fungi today, and he said, he'll be a fun guy to talk to, won't he?
I get that all the time.
Anyway, he was quite interested in it. And he said, I reckon there'd be hundreds of those fungi around. And I said, there might be more. David, would you like to weigh in on how many species of fungi you think there might be in New Zealand?
That's a good one. And people have been trying to guess this for years, and there's plenty of attempts at that. I think, if I'm right in remembering, there's around about 6,000 species of fungi, all from the microfungi, things that you can't see without a microscope, up to the mushrooms, that have names in New Zealand. So that's...
so these are the named ones where someone's gone out, they've taken a sample, they've said, okay, this one is related to the ones that we know about in this way.
They've given it some sort of a Latin name, and that's it. And based on that, and based on, people have tried to say, okay, if you've got an island, say, that's got a certain number of plant species, and then they know, have a pretty good handle on how many fungal species. They use little ratios like this many plants, you'll probably have this many more
species
fungi.
Richness curves.
Right. So in New Zealand, it's been estimated based on that maybe we have something like 20,000 fungi all up, right? Now, so that makes... people are rounding it off. People maybe suggest maybe 20% of our fungi are known to science and the other 80% are not. As it happens, I had a student a couple of years ago called Sam Lasham who got some environmental DNA from soil across the South Island. So this is like a bit, I liken it to tracking COVID. You can't see the COVID.
Well, they did use eDNA for tracking COVID. They got it out of the wastewater, right? So they could see the different...
Yeah, it might have been RNA. But either way, it doesn't matter. That's a minor difference. Who cares? But but it is the same idea, right? So we wanted to do that for fungi. And so one of our other students, Laura Van Galen, did her PhD where she actually sampled the eDNA all up and down the South Island, in focusing on beech forest. And then Sam, this other student that we had come along after, he tried to make a big evolutionary tree, a phylogeny of all of the eDNA for one particular genus of mushrooms called Quaternarius. And it's the biggest genus of mushrooms in the world. If you had to think of what is the most exciting, beautiful, diverse coloured group of mushrooms, it's Quaternarius. And he found that we've got about 200 species named in that genus.
Right.
And he reckons from the eDNA, the indications are there's probably about 800 in total.
Right, so that's four times just from the Nothofagus forest
Just
soil.
from the Nothofagus forest. And funny enough, that's about 20%, which is what people have been guessing as well, right?
Yeah.
So I think we are almost certainly only just scratching the surface with the diversity out
It's
there.
interesting, isn't it? And just to put that in perspective for the folk out there, so that's approximately, best guess, somewhere in the region of 20,000 species of
maybe 25.
fungi. 25.
Do 25.
25,000. So in New Zealand alone, so that's just New Zealand, and I imagine there's quite a high degree of endemism in fungi as well because they mutate quite fast and they stay around in the soil, so it's harder for them to go extinct. For moths, which is a massive group, several hundred families, there's approximately 2,000 species, so that's an order of magnitude down. For birds, there's about 290-something species in New Zealand.
Wow. Yeah.
So just keeping that in focus.
There's an awful lot of fungi
There's an
out
awful
there.
lot of fungi.
Yeah, I'm glad you
out
didn't
there.
mention the only group that probably is going to beat fungi might be the insects, I suppose.
As a group,
be true?
yeah.
But,
Probably.
we don't talk about that.
No, other than
Well, I
the
mean,
fact that they're
obviously moths are
interconnected.
insects.
but as a whole.
But as a
right.
whole,
Yeah.
And
I mean, that's what I hear. That seems to be.
Yeah. And I mean, who knows how many bacteria there are out there.
Yeah, sure.
That's true.
So, are truffles fungi?
They sure are, yep. And they are ectomycorrhizal, like the ones that we were talking about, forming the big mycelial networks in the forest as well.
What are your favourite mushrooms? Like if you had to pick a favourite.
Well, I was just going to go back to farming for a moment
okay.
because we started with a farming
Right,
question
yes.
and people were trying to establish truffles. I just wonder if your dad was looking at some sort
He
of
wasn't looking
side-
at truffles, no.
a side interest.
Yeah, but that is quite. Would that be lucrative?
Yeah, it is. I think.
You need the pigs, don't you?
No, people
use
use
the
dogs
dog.
these
People
days.
use dogs
Yes,
these
that's
days.
right. I think the pigs tend to eat the
Eat the truffles.
Eat the truffles.
And
the
obviously, a
dogs-
pig with a muzzle on it would look weird.
I guess so. Yeah. So, I mean, that was kind of pioneered. The cultivation here in the Southern Hemisphere was pioneered here in New Zealand, really by Ian Hall, who was based here in Dunedin, right?
Yeah,
But it's... and I think one of the things at the time was that it was expected that it would take quite a long time for them to get established and actually produce the truffles. But it did seem to take off quite quickly, and they produced a lot quicker than they expected they would. But, Australia's got a big truffle industry now, I gather too. There's lots of truffiers in Tasmania and maybe in Western Australia. It's not something I know a massive amount about, but I've certainly seen people in Tasmania. You can go and truffle hunt, on these properties.
Why are truffles so expensive? Why is it because of the taste? Why have they got this sort of pinnacle of?
They're an acquired taste. So I had a few stories here. I had a former student who did work on truffles, and she was a bit like you, not a mushroom fan, did not like to eat them. And her comment to me was that the smell of them literally turned her stomach, right? So they are controversially strong. I've certainly had them quite a few times, and they do have it's not really a taste that I'd describe as mushroomy. That's almost like the smell of when you leave the gas tap on, right? There's this almost sort of some sort of an
kind of
aromatic.
sweet almost.
It's weird. It's a weird smell, and it's quite distinctive. But the secret, I think, with truffles, for my money, is to have them with eggs and butter. So scrambled eggs with a lot of butter mixed in there. The hot eggs, you put the shaved or even just out of a jar minced truffle on the top, and somehow the warming up of them just creates this really heady, it's sometimes you might taste something, maybe I haven't really had them many times, but maybe durians like this that you don't like the smell of, but you can't
Once it's
stop it. You've got to have more of it.
that's
you know?
interesting.
Yes.
And I think maybe that's the thing with truffles, because when I've had them, you go, oh, that's weird, that's interesting. Give me more. I need to have more. And porcini are a bit similar. They're a bolete, which have got a very strong mushroomy flavour, really rich, umami-rich sort of a smell.
Yeah, the
And
Italians love porcini.
they love them. I love them. But sometimes you open it up and it's so strong it almost smells like you're smelling a jar of Marmite, you know.
Oh, yeah.
And so some people get turned off by that. But then the more times you have them, your mouth starts watering when you think, oh, I'm going to cook up a porcini risotto today.
They are quite, like you say, mushrooms. And like I have a friend who says, cook anything in butter and it's going to taste good, right?
True. Well, that goes without saying, yes.
But that is one of the most common ways to enjoy fungi, right? And it is that warming up and a bit of fat and a bit of salt and then...
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. I mean, one thing I should just be careful about is that I tend to use the word mushroom for a lot of things that, like even boletes, you know, which haven't got gills under them.
Right.
They've got little tubes underneath instead. But sometimes I just get a bit lazy and call them all mushrooms.
Well, I think that's general parlance, isn't it? I mean, anything that's like in that fungi group.
Yeah, that looks like an umbrella-shaped type thing.
Yeah, anything.
Right.
I mean, basically anything that's edible, people will call it mushrooms, won't they? Because there's packaging made from fungi hyphae, isn't there?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I think
which is
IKEA
pretty good. Instead
are
of styrofoam and stuff, could you potentially eat that? Like, could you cook that up with butter?
Well, then you could eat anything.
You could consider that. I've got to say, I don't know how they make it. So maybe
they're
growing it on sort of some sort of grain.
I think they grow it on a form.
Yeah, that's right. They grow it into form, but there must be some other substrate in there that might be a plant base or something. I'm not
that holds
really,
it all together.
Well, I don't know. Yeah, so I don't know. I would consider eating it if I knew what it was, but I'm not exactly sure how they do it, and that might be a proprietry secret for those.
It might be,
I don't know.
Yeah.
But,
no, it's interesting. But so there's lots of different kind of classes of fungi. Some of, because you were saying the boletes, they're sort of like what?
Yeah,
floppy things without gills.
Yeah, boletes are related to your normal agaric type mushrooms. So the agarics have the gills. The boletes have tubes underneath, like pores.
Right.
But they're quite closely related, and they all have a similar shape. They've got a stalk and a cap, but you can turn them over, and the boletes have a sort of a spongy surface. And there are quite a few edible boletes, but there's also some that are toxic as well.
Yeah.
So
and then truffles, of course, are grown they're underground.
Truffles are in a different phylum altogether. So the mushrooms, all of the mushroom type things, the agarics and the boletes are in the phylum called the Basidiomycota. The truffles are in the Ascomycota, which is actually the biggest group of fungi. And that's, if you had to think of most diseases of humans that are fungi, yeast, most of your soil fungi, they're all ascomycetes.
Oh, right.
So, and truffles happen to be like a massive big version of one of those.
Which brings me along.
Foot.
Yes, which actually brings me along.
Well,
it brings me along to my next question.
It's vaguely closely related to truffles.
Yeah, so my next question is also from Dad.
Yeah.
And I said to him, what do you really want to know about fungi? And he said, I want to know about the fungi that grow into your toenails and what's the best way to get rid of them.
Right, okay.
Which is athlete's foot, so it's kind of, are they all part of the sort of truffle family?
They're in the same phylum as the truffles. But we're talking,
family.
I mean, just remember all vertebrate animals are in one phylum.
Yes,
so
that's right.
We could still be talking about the difference between a bird and a fish. And a fish. So let's not get too
carried
related
away.
They are. But you're
so
right.
So you're not eating toe fungus when you're eating a truffle. We don't want to imply that at all in any way.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. So athlete's foot's actually a few fungi have been identified, and can be cultured from those infections. And the main way to do that is using, you can buy creams like Lamisil and these are basically antifungal compounds that they're called indoles, and they've got a particular structure that interferes with a chemical structure that interferes with the pathway of the synthesis of cell walls in fungi.
Right. Okay.
Cell membranes in fungi. And fungal membranes have a chemical in there called ergosterol, and it's just like cholesterol in our membranes. We think we shouldn't have too much cholesterol because it's bad when you get older, but in fact it's a natural part of our functioning of our membranes.
And you need the right amount of it.
You need the right amount of cholesterol, just like fungi need the right amount of ergosterol in their membranes. So these antifungal creams like Lamisil will basically inhibit the production of ergosterol, and so the fungus simply can't. It stops its ability to grow and metabolize. Right. But it doesn't work super quickly, and that's one of the reasons why they sometimes you need to take those treatments for quite a while, because you've really got to knock the fungi back and keep it from not growing healthily.
Because if you leave a tiny bit behind, it will just it'll just start growing.
It'll start to come back again, yeah. And I mean, good. Foot hygiene is good, and people, everybody knows that if one shares public bathrooms at the pool, then you might be likely to share inoculum from between each other's feet.
And I guess it's that whole, athlete's foot is that moist, damp sort of environment. Which
so
is
keeping it dry is another good thing.
Yeah.
And if it gets really bad, then people kind of reduce the inflammation with cortisone, hydrocortisone and something like that. But that doesn't really treat the cause of it, but it does help to make it more comfortable. Down. So then the next level medications mix the antifungal treatment with the cortisone or something to sort of reduce the symptoms as well as try and help keep it at bay. There are tablets you can take that are also antifungal that work systemically, but and that might be used for skin infections or thrush and things like that. But one little issue is that ergosterol in the fungi is actually kind of not that different from cholesterol. And so some of the drugs that they use to...
They hit your cholesterol in your own membranes.
Yeah, they can have toxic effects on humans. And so there's a
Only
really...
take with your doctor's prescription and advice, people.
Absolutely, that's right, yeah. And it's a really interesting topic because, there's a cool drug called amphotericin B, which is used to, again, it interferes with ergosterol in the membranes. It makes cells leaky, but it has a terrible effect on humans when they get given this drug as well. It can also cause problems for the patient too. And I did mention it to my dermatologist once because I was at the dermatologist and he's like, he knows I'm into fungi and he's, pretty geeky guy. He's obviously likes talking about this sort of stuff. And I said, and we talk about this amphotericin B. And he said, that's a really bad one. We'd only use that if the patient was in hospital because then you could monitor them for the side effects and everything. Wow. And it's off, but it can be used in conjunction so you can reduce the doses, but give that plus something else and then attack the organism from a number of different angles. But they can be kind of hard to get rid of fungal infections because of the similarity between cholesterol and ergosterol.
Oh, that's interesting, eh? Yeah. And the actual fungi that's in your toe, there's no fruiting bodies there. You don't have little toadstools coming out or little mushrooms.
Well, if you do, you need to really go.
That's right. They're mainly yeast-like cells.
Right. Okay. So they're mainly yeast-like cells. Right. And so you're not going to get a truffle-type structure on your toe at any point.
No, if you scrape them off, you're mostly likely to see tiny yeast cells. Sometimes they will... interestingly enough, some of those yeast-like fungi, when they're growing on the body at a higher temperature, then they will be like yeast-like. But if you grow them in a petri dish at a lower temperature, they'll actually form the little hyphal threads.
Interesting.
So they can be dimorphic. But but no, typically we're talking about fungi that tend to mostly be yeast, but there could be a bit of filamentous growth as well, depending on how big what particular type of infection it was. You also get those fungi spreading from the feet, athlete's feet. They can also come up and infect the groin area as well and form diseases like jock itch, And there's an old saying that you should put on your socks before your jocks because
there's like a rhyme like that, isn't there?
Yeah, socks before jocks. Oh,
something else.
No, that's heads, shoulders, knees and toes, isn't it? I don't know. But you got to cover up your feet, and then when you can put your underwear on, then you're
not transferring.
How I'm putting my underwear on here. You're not transferring it exactly. Yeah.
Oh, right. Yeah. Interesting. Crazy. Yes. There was one other question that I had. It was about you were talking about micro something there. It's about microdosing.
Oh, magic mushrooms.
Yeah.
Sure.
Go.
So, because of course, magic mushrooms are fungi.
They are.
And
that's right.
And there's this whole thing about the psychological and medical advances.
Yeah.
And particularly in people with psychological somethings. I don't know anything about microdosing.
You mean it's better than the chemical, psychedelic drugs?
There's kind of two parts of it, isn't there? There's people who just take this microdosing that they just sort of, and there's also sort of like mushroom teas. Yeah, there's people who just take it like a health food, like a vitamin in the morning. But there's also this medical advances and. Like rather than having chemically synthesized.
Yep. So I can tell you a few things about this. Again, it's not totally my area, but I have read a bit about this for teaching purposes. And no, I mean it. We've got to say that magic mushrooms are on the Misuse of Drugs Act 1974, and so one can't go out and collect them and take them because it would be...
Does that make them really hard to study, actually?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, one would need to get a licence from the Ministry of Health to do that, and then you'd be filling out a lot of paperwork about police checks and how far it is from the facility to the nearest school and all that sort of stuff.
So now I've got a whole lot of questions about...
police checks. Sorry.
You can't,
God, how long have I known you and I still can't get that accent sometimes?
Sorry, mate, yeah. I used to think the same about you, Barbara, but I can understand. I've got used to it now, yeah.
Sorry, David.
No, you're right.
Now I've got a whole lot of questions, but if I ask them, people think I'm interested in going to get magic.
No, ask them.
No, look, they're fascinating. They really are fascinating. So there is some real proper good research that was done in the US that shows that for patients who have chronic mental illnesses that are not treatable by conventional drugs, so they're not responding to the types of drugs that they might give, that has been shown that those patients do benefit from doses of psilocybin or some of the drugs that are in magic mushrooms, right? And sometimes it can only take one session of these drugs in order to sort of produce a long-lasting positive benefit. So
so just like a switch. Yeah. Like it's basically flicking a switch in their brain somehow.
Somehow, and I don't know
that's the only way you're going to get long-lasting from a small dose, isn't it?
So it is pretty cool. I think... let me get some thoughts straight here. So one of the things is that because of the negative associations of just taking magic mushrooms, like one might take LSD, it being a drug addict, or just seeking...
Is LSD based on mushrooms?
No, but they have similar sort of trips and things with the effect that you have, right? It's interesting. Some of the effects that people describe with having magic mushrooms are very similar across different people. They describe a feeling of suddenly understanding how the world works. That's a really common thing. They feel at peace with everything, and so that makes sense that it might be a really cool thing to give a patient, say, that's just been given a terminal diagnosis, not something you want to get, and so one could consider that if you were able to take some medication that made you at peace with the world and understand how everything's connected, and then that
it does make you wonder why that's restricted, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah, if we all took it, then we might be a lot happier in our work. I wonder if shamans took them.
Yeah, well, that's where this person who was asking the question, who for privacy considerations, I won't say who they are, but you know who you are, and I hope you're listening.
So I believe that is that there are certainly historical uses by many indigenous cultures of these things.
I mean, the Celts, I imagine, were well into...
anything.
Yeah. I don't know, it just seems like, that whole shaman thing. I don't know what the Celt shamans were called, actually.
Druids.
But I don't know.
Druids,
so one of the things is, I think, to get away from the stigma of the idea that you're just taking magic mushrooms as a recreation, this, I think, is one of the drivers for the microdosing idea. Because... Okay, you want to be able to say you can have this for some medical benefit, right? Or clinical benefit, but you don't want to be sort of
associated with that.
Yeah, but the thing is that the benefit these people are getting is the benefit you get when you have enough of the magic mushroom, right? So it does make me wonder, and my understanding is that some of the microdosing studies have found that the effect isn't there, right?
So does it depend on the person, maybe? Some people are more...
Yeah, I mean, when people take the magic mushrooms in these clinical settings, they're very careful to control the environment because there's not a massive amount of information or research on evidence, for particularly toxic effects of magic mushrooms.
Right.
There are of other mushrooms, but they're not going to.
And it's hard to get that evidence because it's so hard to study them in the first place.
Yeah, but there isn't much evidence of. They're considered to be relatively non-toxic compared to other mushrooms, right? But the risk is that some people may have allergic reactions to certain mushrooms, and that's not so easily predictable. But more importantly, it's panic attacks, actually. That can happen. And so if people have had mushrooms and they haven't realised, then that feeling for them is like pretty
It's not a good one.
No, you don't want it. And so when they do these clinical studies where they're looking at patients who would benefit psychologically from these, from taking these substances, they get them to come in. It's all nice music playing. There's nurses there looking after them, reassuring them, and everything.
Sounds lovely, doesn't it? Sounds like
it does sound pretty cool.
Yeah. Because
So
if they have a bad trip, for want of a better word, then it's going to be doubly bad for them.
That's right. Yeah. So I really do think that there's promise for it, and I am aware one of our former students is doing his PhD looking at just that at Auckland University, looking at studying magic mushrooms and with all the right permissions and everything. Yeah. And so it is happening, and I do think that some of the research is legitimate, and so I do think it could potentially have really good benefits. Yeah.
Hey, there's so many things we could still be talking about.
We barely got started.
We barely got started. We barely scratched the surface. We haven't even talked about beer or bread making.
Or is toxic mould, is that a mushroom?
Yeah, it's a fungus.
All moulds are funguses, aren't they? Yeah.
Yep.
And slime moulds as well. So that
slime moulds are not fungi. That's okay. No, I mean, gosh, you've got to keep on top of these things, though, don't you? Because people are. Yeah, so they kind of look like fungi, especially
so
when
what kingdom do they go in?
They're a kind of a pretty early diverging lineage of their own. They're kind of very loosely. I mean, they've got a name. I think it's Mycetozoa, it's called. And
have they recently changed? Like recently, in the last 30 years, changed?
Probably 30. Yeah. Yep.
God, I'm feeling really old now. I'm feeling like I might have been taught when I was a student that slime moulds were part of the fungal community.
I think I might have been taught that when I was a student too.
Oh dear. Yep. Now I feel like science has just said,
it's just
that's
past
old
you.
news.
Yeah. It's fine.
Oh, jeez.
We know now. It's all right.
We know now. All right. So they just diverge really early.
Yeah. Sometimes people might call them protists, but that's a really generic big dumping ground for lots of little lineages of organisms. Yeah. I mean, slime moulds are amazing because they're basically like vacuum cleaners for nature, and they go around sucking up bacteria and cleaning of all the surfaces, and that's what they live off.
Yeah, it's cool, eh?
Yeah, pretty neat.
Who would have thought that something called a slime mould would be so cool? And a cleaning thing. Like, how many people have been scrubbing their bathrooms thinking it's slime mould? Is it slime mould?
Oh, well, bathroom, you're thinking of the pink thing?
I'm thinking of the pink thing.
That's a yeast. That is a fungus.
That is a fungus. There you go.
Good, yeah.
So we're balancing up here the good things and the bad things in the world that fungi give us. And, of course, for those who like beer, for those who like bread, fungi for eating, mushrooms.
Fermenting soy
sauce, yeah.
Lots of stuff.
Anything that's fermented, basically, has got fungi.
Well, kind of. I mean, bacteria can do fermentation too. So sauerkraut is kind of a mixture of fungi and bacteria, I think, really. Yeah.
But, all that soil conditioning is really, a lot of that is down. I mean, it's down to other things as well. There's bacteria in the soil and there's roots that break up the big bits and stuff. But really,
fungi are really important. And soil is the home globally. That's where most fungi are in the soil. Yep.
There's a recent issue of The Conversation from Australia that came out, and it's got an article in there about how fungi are going to save the world, and it's all about putting more fungi in the soil, and they sort of go around sprinkling
fungi spores,
like just spores all over. And I just to me, and I read it, to start with, it sounds like an amazing article, amazing thing, amazing research. Oh my goodness, fungi are going to save the world. They're going to capture all this carbon in the soil, and then it sort of seems to me also, in the kind of cynical part of my brain, here's a journalist who's just realised that fungi are in the soil that everybody else has known forever, and it seems like kind of obvious that fungi are in the soil. I wondered if you had a take on that just quickly.
Yeah, I think that it sounds like a good idea, and it'd be fun to go out and collect lots of fungi and have big culture collections that one could then go out and help maybe use that in restoration. But my understanding of a lot of these things is that it's very it's more difficult to scale these up into sort of agriculture or environment level scenarios and actually make it really work. There's less evidence that some of these things are really easy to bring to fruition. Same with mycorrhizas in agriculture. They can show that the plants will tend to get the fungi that they need.
Yeah, and that was my first thought on it as well. Is that what's there is probably in some sort of balance because it's been working together in that place with all the other things that are there. They've kind of probably reached some sort of equilibrium.
Possibly.
If you
in a
just
disturbed environment, that may not be the case. Though.
Yeah,
so maybe there's some
when you're in a
like
disturbed environment,
yeah.
I would say that's your best bet. But
you'd have to bring the trees with you because
at the right time as well.
Farmers,
exactly. That's right. And you've got to do it at the right time. You've got to take into account competition from grasses, which can totally smother everything. So
it does sort of seem like you kind of need to understand the whole system and how it works and all together. Because otherwise you're just like throwing the whole swing or a seesaw in one direction without really having thought through the whole process.
Yep.
Oh, we're out of time here. Hey, thank you so much, David.
My
we
pleasure.
could totally talk to you forever, hours and hours of enjoyment of fungi talk here. And if you've just been listening to this, it's the OI podcast. If you particularly like this episode, which I can't imagine anyone who hasn't.
If you're into toe jam and...
Yeah. Anyway, if you particularly like this, you might also like our previous interviews with Sir Prof Mark on New Zealand grasslands and Associate Prof Janice Lawes on the greenhouse gases and trees. Thank you very much.
Kia ora.
Thanks for having me.
You've been listening to the OI podcast, the shout out for the arts, sciences and Mataranga Māori.
You can support this podcast by becoming a member of the OI. Check out the Otago Institute for Arts and Sciences on Facebook or our website.
If you'd like to listen again to this episode or others from the series, look for the OI podcast on ORFM's website, oar.org.nz.
Brought to you by the Otago Institute for Arts and Sciences, the Otago branch of the Royal Society of New Zealand.
This podcast was produced by ORFM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On the Air.